everybody. Welcome to the Six Bridges Book Festival. I'm Emily Robertson, author of Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters, which is a retelling of a Greek myth with a reality TV setting, which will explain why I'm moderating this panel with Peter and Maria Hoey, who are here to talk about their really amazing graphic novel called In Perpetuity, which I have here, which is backwards there. But so Peter and Maria are a brother-sister team who are American artists who work as illustrators, graphic artists, and cartoonists. Their art has appeared in The New Yorker, Playboy, Rolling Stone, New York Times, and more. They are bi-coastal, with Peter in Northern California and Maria in Brooklyn, New York, and they've been collaborating together since the 90s. So In Perpetuity is about a surreal smuggling operation across the boundaries of life and death. It's the afterlife with a real film noir twist as Jim, who's the shade ghost, who's pumping gas in this endless twilight when some guys show up from his past and give him an offer he can't refuse. I totally love this story, and I can't wait to talk to you guys about it. For anyone who hasn't seen it, like, I can't recommend highly enough the physical book. The images are beautiful. The book is just such a high quality object of its own. Like, you guys must be super proud of this.
Very proud.
Thank
When
you.
it came in the box, it was a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, it's just beautiful.
Perfect.
I love to see like the amount of detail that clearly went into making this book. And so the one thing I wanted to show everyone is they did this lovely thing where the color scheme when you're in the afterlife is this sort of grays, very noir. And then when you're in like sunny Los Angeles, it goes to this beautiful yellow, and you could see the spread has both on it. And it's just this lovely way of orienting us as readers in which world we're in, because these characters are going back and forth. So that was really beautiful. So I was wondering for you guys to start with, why did you choose to go with a Greek mythological afterlife?
I have always liked Greek mythology from when I was a kid. I picked up some anthology of Greek mythology, and I just really liked it. And one of the things that I enjoy about the stories of Greek mythology is how balanced the stories are, and which leaves them open to multiple interpretations depending on which character you're looking at. And so that just appealed to me like a great deal as a way of developing a story and including some of the Greek gods in it. And Greek gods they're capricious, they're mean, they carry grudges, they have affairs. I mean, they're just all over the place. So it's very enjoyable. Yeah.
Was that also how you were, Emily, with your book?
Oh, I was just fascinated by them. Yeah, I ended up, you guys have a noir setting. I have a reality TV setting.
I just started reading it last night.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting.
It's wonderful.
Well, I got obsessed with how the myths tie into the world today, like how fame works in mythology, how similar it is to our current moment.
It's really true. I mean, you read them and they were written, a really long time ago, and they seem utterly current. I mean,
utterly current.
You totally understand the people and their motivations. They're exactly we haven't changed a bit. We're still greedy, power hungry, backstabbers, and we get into huge problems all the time, often of our own devising. So
right. And then there's also this huge film noir element to the book. It has it first of all is just sort of inspired by that. You kind of have that feeling, not just of like the classic film noir, but also that like you could almost see that at the end of Chinatown, where he's like, that's just Chinatown, Jake. You really have that feeling here in this book. And I was wondering for you guys, how much of an inspiration was the noir?
Yeah, the big time. I mean, we grew up in Philadelphia, and the TV stations would just screen old movies at night. So we grew up seeing them. They were just like filler that they drop into UHF stations. But they were great movies, and we just had a taste for it from a very young age. You know, we were attracted not only to like the stories, but to the style of them. You know, they had a really nice edginess to them, and it reminded me, you know, somewhat of Greek mythology, and that there was mean, capricious, power mad people doing all sorts of crazy stuff to each other, and with a sense of fatalism running through it too, which I think was very important. Yeah.
And it's very real. It's very pulpy.
Yeah.
You could almost watch those movies and see how they did it in a good way.
Right.
Was it obtainable? And it just really, I think it lends itself to comics, which should be approachable to everyone. It's like, and it's also very American. Just, you know, a lot of our stories, it's very based in American culture and sensibility. So it's a little out of time, but so that's kind of how we grew up, a little out of time watching this stuff.
I love too how the you know, the thing about noir, like what makes it noir is that the starkness of the light, you know, it's that black and white, not just
Yeah.
that it's black and white, but the edges
Yeah.
of things, like how things feel physical. And I loved how you guys in this very, you know, of course it's comics panels, it's a two-dimensional world, but you built so much richness into the sense of like these are as though they are real things, even though
Yeah.
they're
Yeah, the lighting in those kinds of movies from the 40s, it was very stylized lighting. It was not natural looking at all. I mean, many of those films, almost all the scenes take place at night, you know, and it's not real night, but they're lighting it that way with very dramatic, subjective lighting that like isolates people and frames people. And like as a you know, as a young artist, that appealed to me a great deal. I noticed it right away, and so we try to bring some of that into our comic panels.
But then when you go to this sort of California day, you have that like flat LA light, which is just,
Mhm.
I was just really interested for you guys in the developmental process of the comic. Like, how long does it take from like, we have an idea to like, this is what it's going to look like?
Well, this one it was written first, you know, in prose because I knew the kind of story I wanted to do. The thing that cinched it for me was when I realized like Los Angeles is AL, uh, is Los Angeles is LA and afterlife is AL. And I saw the reversibility of that. It's like, okay, we have to have it like the afterlife and the real life, and then just have them moving back and forth between the two. And then we wrote the story out in prose just to get a sense of like the characters and the arc of the plot and everything. And then we sort of broke it up into chapters, which move between the real life, sunny Los Angeles, and the afterlife. And then once you start putting it together, you end up rewriting it all like over and over again. You know, the dialogue, you know, scenes shift when you start seeing them like drawn out. So that was the fun part, you know, when it all came together that way.
I
Yeah.
And you
have,
need it to be that quick read, like
yeah,
bright to gray.
Yeah.
exactly.
You can't, like, it's great to be subtle, but you also have to give like a very readable clue to your readers.
Right. Just on that note, for anybody who's going to read this, which you all should, here's a line I loved. For a dead person, he was an emotional roller coaster. I just
Mhm.
love that line. Like, that's the world, like like it has that snappiness to it, and also
Yeah.
just that deadpan. And then the LA-AL connection
Yeah.
was amazing.
Yeah. Thank
Um,
you. Yeah, that's it. That's important because, you know, in the Greek mythology and the afterlife, you know, people are shades. There's no earthly, there's no sensual pleasure. So it was really fun, like inventing what Los Angeles, the afterlife would be like, because there's no food anymore or drink. There's no enjoyment of any kind. There's no sensual pleasure. There's no sex. There's no reproduction. It's very aimless. So that's what the Greek afterlife was. You just drift around. So I figured, well, if you're just drifting around and you're in LA, you're going to be driving. You're just going to drive all the time. And there would be jobs like gas stations and used bookstores,
Dry
but
cleaners.
dry cleaners, you'd want to look good. But if you can go to bars, but the glasses are always empty. You know, there's live music, but it's terrible. There's movies, but they're all just cut to hell and broken, and it doesn't make any sense. So it's unenjoyable. Yeah, it
Uh,
was fun. It was fun doing that.
The one thing that was hilarious is everyone's smoking all the time. It's like the
Yeah.
last. It made me laugh because it's like, it's like those people that have given up every vice except they still smoke. It's
It is
very
just
good stuff.
killing time.
Yeah.
That's what shades do in the afterlife is you kill time that goes
And
on
puzzles.
forever.
And
Yeah.
puzzles.
Yeah, you have to do crossword puzzles all day because there's nothing else to do. Yeah.
So this is a process question. What is it like working with your sibling?
It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. We work back and forth together, like developing it and sort of then assembling it and drawing it and then coloring it and then writing it and rewriting it and polishing it. And so it's kind of like yeah, it just goes back and forth, and we live on opposite sides of the country, so we're just like emailing it to each other like all day long.
I was at this festival this weekend, and this woman who's, she's a teacher, very interesting, and a poet. And she goes, "Oh, so you work together, your siblings? So you're so lucky. You have shorthand. You have this shorthand, which is like
Right.
that's how we communicate. It can be on the same wavelength, and you don't have to write it out in an email or
Right.
Yeah.
And if it stinks, well, the other person tells you pretty quickly, and
Right.
you gotta let it roll. Or if it's really good, you're not like that individual in your own room. I think it's good. You got the other person that you can bounce it off of.
Right. Yeah, that's
So
really cool. I saw in one of the bios that you guys have siblings in between.
Oh
We
yeah,
do.
there's four.
And
There's four
so
brothers.
They come out and buy our books and
yeah, do they
support us.
participate in are they artists? Do they
They're not,
participate?
but they're funny.
Yeah, they're funny.
Which is an art in its own,
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Yeah.
everyone supports each other and appreciate, but everyone's very unique.
Yeah. I love that.
Very, yeah, which is cool. Everyone has their own thing, but very supportive.
Yeah.
And it was fun growing up because the Sunday dinner was brutal in a good way.
In a good way. Yeah, I'm raising 3 sons and I have a sister, which one sister is really different from 3 boys.
Yeah, we had 5 boys and then me.
Yeah.
So our parents, they didn't live long lives because
Yeah, we ran them
be
ragged.
prepared, Emily. I'm sorry.
The funniest thing about boys is when they go to like watch a show and they like run and jump on the sofa.
Yeah.
I was like,
Oh,
really?
yeah, we
Jump
did
over
that.
the back. Like,
if you have
okay.
drywall, be prepared that there'll be holes in
Exactly.
it. Mm-hmm.
So I was very curious, what does, for you guys, a graphic artist, novelist, illustrator, sort of day-to-day, week-to-week work life look like? Like, how do you guys balance all the different things you do?
Well, we do. Like I can tell you, like right now, we're working on our next book, and we're about like 2/3 of the way through it. So it's going to be 192 pages long, and we're up to like 120 pages now. So we're very conscious of that. We have like a sort of loose deadline, but then in between that, like the way we make a living day to day is we do assignment illustration. We have an agent in New York who gets us jobs and stuff. And so those come in and it'll be like, oh, we need 3 little spot drawings. We need sketches Thursday and the finish next week. So we tuck that in between the other one. But while we're waiting for the art director to get back to us, we go back to the graphic novel we're working on and like, okay, let's do 2 more pages,
Right.
Yeah.
I was looking, yeah, sorry,
And
Maria.
then we'll do festivals in between. So maybe we exhibit at 12 or 13 festivals a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's from literally, a block away this weekend to, going to France.
Oh,
So
wow.
and it's kind of wonderful, but that becomes like your life.
Right.
That kind of is your seasons, and it sets your schedule for a lot of things too.
I was looking at your website and the illustrations are so cool. And some of them I realized like, oh, I'd seen that because I may not read everything in the New Yorker, but I always look at the illustrations in the comics. So I was like, well, I've seen some of their stuff.
Cool.
So that's
That's cool.
So I was also very curious about the division of labor for you guys. I know a lot of graphic novelists, one person will do the prose and another person does the
Mm.
art. And the prose is so strong and the art is so strong, but it sounds like from what you guys are saying that it's both are very collaborative. Is that?
Yeah,
But
they
Pete,
are. Yeah.
yeah, and Pete wrote this.
Well,
Oh,
I think Maria dropped out there for a second. Yeah, I think what she was saying was I do the typing when we write them. I'm the one who sort of organizes it and writes it all out. But there's lots of feedback from Maria and other people we know. So it really is kind of a collaborative act. And from there, like I do the sketches, I sketch out the page frames and what's going to be in each thing, and we we sketch them out and we drop the text in roughly, and then kind of redesign the whole thing. And then I do the basic line work, and Maria does the coloring. Yeah.
so Maria, did you get back online? Let's see if she's,
I think she may have dropped out.
yeah,
Oh,
we'll see.
yeah,
Okay. So I saw that this story was in part an Orpheus reimagining.
totally. Yeah.
And I was really curious what element, as having written a retelling, what elements of the sort of traditional Orpheus character did you decide to bring into Jim?
I really liked one of the things that really appealed to me about the Orpheus myth, which I think is one of the really great ones, like really just incredible. It's been told many different times, like Jean Cocteau did his film versions of it. And the thing that's really cool about the character of Orpheus is that he's a demigod. First of all, like his father was Apollo and his mother was a mortal, Calliope. So he's got an edge, and he was a great musician as well, and very good looking, and everybody, the ladies loved him. He was the bomb. He was a rock star, but he made a couple of mistakes, and but he was able to get back into the down into the underworld because he had pulled. His father was able to pull strings to get him
Right.
to go see Hades and beg to bring his girlfriend Eurydice back from the dead because she was bitten by a viper. But, Hades played a little trick on him. And shades don't make any noise. So he said, yeah, you've charmed us with your music. My girlfriend, Persephone, who I kidnapped, by the way, and I'm holding her down in the underworld. She loves your music, and I like it too. So, hey, you're free to go with Eurydice. She'll follow behind you. And as you well know, there's just one little catch: you can't look back.
Right.
And that doubt, he did it on purpose. He did. He did it on
Right.
purpose. And so Orpheus looked back. And so to me, Orpheus was a very interesting character, a very complicated character. He both had everything going for him, but he had doubts. And look what happened to him.
Right.
Yeah. He was a doomed character, like so many characters in film noir and noir fiction. He was doomed. With all the advantages, he still lost out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of loved also how Jim and all the shades, you sort of built in that looking back into the story because they're trying not to look back and then being forced to,
Yeah.
when they're given the opportunity to look back, it becomes very hard for them to settle back into that sort of lifeless, endless life that they have. So,
Well, that would be the one thing that all the shades would want. We talked about like it's the smuggling between the afterlife and the real life. And what the shades can offer the real life is they have plenty of money in the afterlife, but it's worthless. You can't do anything with it. But if you can smuggle it across to the living side, that's great. But what the shades want is to go back to the living world, if only just for a little while. They never lose the taste for that. They want to be alive again. So that's the trade that's the black market that would develop.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Hades would be totally against that. He's a ruthless guy. And
right.
yeah, and when he catches you messing with him, it's like a film noir thing where you cross the bad guy. You get it. Yeah.
Right. Um, so this was another thing, which is the Hades and Persephone do show up as characters in the graphic novel for everybody
Mhm.
who's wondering about that. And how did you decide? Because they really have their own, they do have the sort of film noir element, but then they also have their own sort of timeless aesthetic. And so I was super curious for you guys about sort of developing that aesthetic for Hades and Persephone.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's true. We wanted them to look, sort of godlike because that's what they are, but they couldn't be dressed in like double-breasted suit. He wouldn't wear a double-breasted suit, but he would wear a kind of Edwardian suit. They live in the Griffith Park Observatory, which is a perfect place for them to live because it's on top of LA and they can look down on everything. But they would be set apart from everyone else, and he would be almost kind of like a general. He'd be as I imagined him, and she would be a little bit wraith-like because she's stuck down in the underworld, just unhappy most of the time.
Mhm.
She's a prisoner. Really. And she's accepted her fate, but she would like to go back too, which is why he screens films of the sun for her all the time, and she complains it's not the same. Yeah.
And like all women, they get the last word.
She does get the last word.
He does. Yeah.
That was really fun. The end is very fun. I really enjoyed it. So the next question I had for you guys was about the process of publishing and distributing your work. I was very curious about to what extent are you partnering with publishers? To what extent are you doing it independently? Like, how does that look for you as you share your work with the world?
We do both, actually. This book, In Perpetuity, was published by Top Shelf, which is an imprint of IDW, and they're a comics publisher, and so that's sort of like the above ground publisher that we have that gets our work out there and puts it gets in bookstores and stuff like that. And then Maria and I also publish our own books. They're not novels; they're shorter form books. And we write and draw and publish those ourselves. And those we sell mostly at these festivals that we do all the time. Like we did sell them in stores for a while, but it's very hard with like consignment and stuff like that to chase down getting paid and to keep showing back up to the store. So it's easier for us to just lug them around in a suitcase and go to these festivals and sell them there. Yeah.
And that's sort of a tradition especially in the United States for comics. That's very DIY, underground. That's how you do it, and which is pretty wonderful. You can literally make your own book, but it is also very wonderful to have a really good publisher
Right.
who produces a beautiful book. And I'm sure you know it. You get emails from people in far off countries who
Yes.
found your book, and
That's the most
yeah.
interesting thing is that you're like, I don't even that they
Yep.
found it at the library or they.
Exactly. Yeah. And then our books also get into libraries, which is fantastic. And to have a
Yeah.
publisher who appreciates your work and wants to support it is pretty great.
Yeah.
But it's also wonderful to just, if you want to make a book, you can just do it and it can come out in a few months, which is
That's where I
pretty
think
cool.
it's so fascinating. I was talking to someone a couple years ago who was a comic book graphic novelist, comic book artist, and he was saying he does the thing where you sort of pre-orders basically, like
Mhm.
sort of he lives in Northwest Arkansas, and he said he just like sets up a table and like people can come and sign, and once he gets enough people that he
That's
can
cool.
fund the order, he'll do the book and then he'll ship them out. And I thought that was so interesting too, just that same like
A lot of people use Kickstarter for that too, or that sort of business model.
right.
We prefer, I don't know, we do it the old fashioned way.
Yeah.
We fill our garage with a book and then we try and sell it.
I mean, I love
But
that.
it is pretty cool. It's pretty cool that although we haven't done Kickstarter, that for people that do enjoy doing it, I mean, that's a way of they're almost like an advertising partner for you because they help promote your book,
Right.
and people will buy it that way too, which is
Yeah.
cool.
So I'm very curious. So when you guys go to these festivals, you have, your suitcase full of books and you're in upstate New York or you're in France or you're,
Yeah.
sort of as you're talking to people, like it's sort of what is that process like? Because this has to be, there's so much work that has to have gone into this. Like I write books and that has a lot of work, but there's no coloring involved. Like I don't have to color anything. Like
It kind of it pulls you out of your shell. Like
yeah.
we're pretty solitary people, so it's like you had to kind of learn to be social, which is a pretty good skill to have. So I mean, I'm a real introvert, but I learned how to interact with other humans in order to have them be interested in my books. And it's,
Yeah.
I mean, that's also pretty cool. Someone just comes and wants to buy your stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think that to
Literally
me
by the
is like
cover.
that to me is like one of the coolest things about this whole process is that whole, and I mean this is what the festival's all about, it's what the library's all about,
Mhm.
but that moment where one human made a thing and they want another human to buy it and then they do and then you have that
Exactly.
beautiful exchange, like there's something lovely about the gift economy and all those things, but there's something really special about someone went to work and they earned their money
Mhm.
as a barista or whatever else, and then they came and they bought the product of your
Yeah.
heart, mind, and hands. Like
Yeah, it
it's a
sincerely
really
means
neat
something.
thing.
It's like a big feeling when someone does it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't get old.
I haven't found it to get old at
Yeah.
all. It's like
And the
very
one
exciting.
is in France, like I was telling you the other day, they value comics in a very different way than the US. Adults read them. It's just in their tradition. They call it the ninth art form. I mean, it's
Really?
on that level. Yeah. So this is the
Wow.
ninth art festival in Angoulême, and people come from all over the world. And it's just complete hospitality. You know, you make money, you sell
Yeah.
books, you meet people. It's pretty cool. It's not just like, sleepaway camp or something. It's,
Right.
yeah,
Um,
the best of the best are all there, which is pretty cool.
and for you guys, as you sort of, so did talk me through the process of your career. So Pete, you were working in as an illustrator first, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was working, I was originally working at a number of newspapers. The last one was the Washington Post. And I left that in like 94. And I was just because I was already doing a lot of freelance work. And by 97, I really wanted to get a coworker just because it was just getting too much. And Maria had just gotten out of art school. And so she moved to DC and that's when we started working together. And it was right around that time when we got called up by this Monty Beauchamp, who was an editor who was he had an anthology, a comics anthology called Blab that was being put out by Fantagraphics. And he had seen some of our illustration work and just called us up and said, "Hey, would you guys ever want to do comics?" And honestly, we were like, "Wow, we actually never thought of that before." I mean, we read comics, but it never occurred to us like to actually do them. So that's when we started doing comics, like in the mid '90s, and uh, after a while, we were like, wow, we should just start doing our own books, like not like with a publisher or anything, but just like our like self-published. And so we started doing that. I think the first one came out in like 2008 or 2009. And, so we've just been doing that ever since. And we began doing books with Top Shelf in, I think 2018 was the first one. They published an anthology of all our self-published stuff. And so it was after that we were like, oh, we should try doing a long form, like a graphic novel. And that was a total learning curve, because we'd never written or thought about anything. We usually did stuff that was like 8 pages long or 10 pages long and put like 4 of them together and you got a book. But this was like, okay, 200 pages long. It's like just exponentially more plot development and characters and everything else. So it was cool. We enjoy it.
For the comics, do you have sort of like recurring characters? Like,
Yeah, we have these 2 animal characters. Maria can explain
They're
them.
called Salts and Peps. So it's
okay.
two sort of hapless dogs. very, so they'll pop up, they'll have short stories, sort of episodic adventures that they're in.
Right.
Old-timey looking, but relatable. And they're very human.
I love that. To me, it's so fun to think just about, I mean, just really the experience of reading the novel, which again, just to recommend it, you really have like, you've built this whole world because you have the images and you have the words, and then they're really great at atmosphere. So there are places where even though, I can't smell it, it's a gas station. I know what a gas station smells like.
Yeah.
So you're sort of pulling in, and then you have some, quotations of songs. There's bees in it. So I feel like you really do a great job of building this world that as a reader, you can just kind of sink into. And I was thinking about like, as you're writing these other comics that you're doing, you're sort of building a universe that your readers are returning to. And that is really interesting to me over the amount of time you've had. Like, do you feel like, what have you noticed has grown or changed about your process, your work over this time?
Oh, I think it just expands, it
Yeah.
expands outward. I mean, we started with just like the things that we knew that we could do, which was pretty limited because we'd never done comics before. And then as we did more, we just like the stories got kind of bigger and the characters and the plots got wider and kind of like we got more confident in like in situations and how stories would resolve themselves. And it just, and each one kind of spurs on the next one. They kind of build on each other, I think.
Yeah. And you get not faster you just get better at doing it, but you can also produce more. But you have to start. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's how people always ask me, sort of like, what, everybody, because Lifestyles came out as a young adult novel. So when it first came out, I was going to sort of teen book festivals and things. And so I'd have teenagers ask me all the time, like, I love to read. How do I get from starting with loving to read to actually having a book on the shelf? And I was like, read and write. Like, that's pretty much like,
yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah,
and
just do
share
it.
your work with other people so you can see, because you can't see your blind spots. Like, you can't see what doesn't work, which I was thinking is really great about you guys for collaborating, as it probably shortens the learning curve if somebody can be like, I don't understand.
Yeah,
You'll still get that stinger on Goodreads though that'll tell you.
I see. If you can, I cannot read that. What I found is, so Lifestyles got translated into French, and for some reason I can read French reviews and it doesn't like knock me off, because my French is so bad that I'm like translating. So somehow
you just see good.
Or like worst thing I've ever read. Like, they're gonna say it in some way that's interesting. So it's like, and also it can't be the worst thing. Like, seriously, there are worse things. But in English, I almost have to like stay away from them.
You just can't look.
I struggle.
For a lot of reasons, yes.
But do you guys have advice for young people, or not even young people,
comics,
for new comics people?
They call them minis because they're literally minis. They can be one panel, 4-pager, stapled. Young people, like, they'll get a little table at a show where they'll just carry their minis. They'll give you one. I mean, they just start making them.
So fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think like the technology for producing booklets or zines or whatever you want to call them has gotten so much cheaper and easier to use. I mean, I went to art school in the late 70s and it was pre-computers. I mean, there was just, everything had to get done by hand. I mean, or you had to get these huge stat cameras to take photos of your drawing to reproduce it in a book. Now everyone has, iPhones and computers and scanners, and they can go to Kinko's or whatever and just publish it. It's like, it's amazing. And in very small editions and whatever size or how much color they want to use, like the ability to have printing things in color is very inexpensive now. And so that part is really, I don't think it's never been easier to publish your own books. I think. Yeah.
And don't sweat it about, it doesn't have to be on Amazon.
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
it's better if it's not, actually. And it's actually probably more authentic if you're just making them.
Right. I mean, I just love that. Like the idea that, you have, because what's so cool to me about comics is you have a complete thing. Like you have the whole thing. Like, if you're giving so many clues to the reader about like what the world is like that, in prose, they have to kind of like the castles in my mind, I have to get them on the page and then have the reader build the castles, but you guys can kind of like show what the castles are like.
Yeah. 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 It's both a shorthand because you just show it rather than describe it. But then you also got to make it interesting enough that people are going to want to, explore it. It's got kind of got a double edge to it.
And the flow has to be good so that they can get through the story. They can really read it. That is important.
Yeah, that seems like it is, because this is not it's beautiful, but it's not a coffee table book. It's a story with
Right. And you want people to
character.
keep turning pages like a book. So it's got to
Right.
be, they have to dive into the world. It's like a paper film, essentially.
Yes, that's what was really striking to me about it. So can you
Yeah.
tell me what you guys are working on next?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
The book we're working on now is called Shadower, and it's about a young woman who's growing up in a divided city, kind of like Belfast or Beirut, or it's a city. It's the capital city of a small unnamed country that was torn apart by civil war. And after the war is over now, but the city's divided into sections where armed groups, political organizations control those sections of the city. And there's basically green lines between them. Like they're separate. People in one district don't have any contact with people in the other district. There's militiamen. It's not a nice place to live. And so this young woman who's a theater student, her parents were both involved in the theater before the war. She gets called up by the guy who runs the intelligence service in her district. Her parents were politically involved. And he basically makes her an offer. He wants her to impersonate another young woman in another district who she resembles. And the reason he wants her to impersonate her is because she works as a waitress in a cafe where the rival intelligence chief has tea every day and hangs out there. And her job would be to work there impersonating this other woman for just a few days and plant listening devices under his samovar tea and then recover them at the end of the day and pass them off to someone else. And reluctantly, she agrees to do that. And it turns out that she's in a world of trouble. And that's the story. It turns out that the young woman who she's impersonating also has a story. That as it goes on, she finds out more and more that she jumped from the frying pan into the fire.
Oh, that's cool.
And it has sort of some supernatural elements to it as well. Yeah. As she's impersonating the other woman, she slowly starts becoming the other woman.
And it's maybe fall of 2025.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Also a top shelf book.
yay.
Oh yeah, top shelf.
Yay. Yes, no, that's great. I love also the ability, and it really is shown in perpetuity, to really play with space and time, which I think
Yeah.
comics have sort of always done, whether it's on the superhero side or on, other sort of classic comics and graphic novels. So to me, it was really interesting seeing how you sort of set the rules of a world when it's such a physical material. Clearly you guys made this. So then
Yeah.
having a world where the shades have a real look to them here. Like you can tell when someone's a ghost and when they're not.
Yeah.
And so as you guys are sort of working with bending the rules, do you sort of sit down and say, what are the
Sometimes you'll have to go back. Maybe it got better by page 60.
Yes.
So you got to go back and fixed, 1 through 60, because
Yeah.
actually it's working a little bit better now.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes you don't see it until you're halfway through the book. Like, wait, it really needs to be more like this. It's not like a huge change, hopefully. It's just like small changes, like make them look more like this. It's like, okay. And then, okay, now we have to go back to the first 59 pages and just subtly shift it. So it all kind of like, because you need the continuity. Yeah. You build this world for people through pictures and words, but the pictures have to have a continuity. If things look one way in the beginning, they need to look the same way. Just like with films, you need continuity editors. If the person sets a glass on the table on page 36, and on page 37 you go back to the table and there's no glass on it, you have to
the
explain
comic gods will be very mad.
Yeah.
They will
Well-
find it and they will be angry.
What I think is
They'll put it
interesting
on
is
Goodreads.
Yeah.
right. They'll put it on Goodreads. But I think it's interesting how much your subconscious notices that something's, and I am not the person who's great at visual detail, but I'll sometimes feel like something feels off, something feels
Yeah.
off. And then you look and you're like, oh, that's a slightly different color.
Yep.
Yep.
And it's not enough that, like, for me, my conscious mind isn't going to pick it, or that picture is in a film, that picture's crooked where,
Yeah.
it wasn't.
We'll build a palette, and so we'll use a palette that goes through the whole book. So your colors are always going to be the same. Her blouse is going to be that same build.
But
sometimes you'll catch it when you're proofing it for the 5th time.
Right.
But that's
is
okay.
Is that something you guys do really early, the palette?
Yes.
We do, but like Maria was saying, we adjust it as we go. We fine tune it, and sometimes that means having to go back and like sort of change the colors of some of the earlier things, but not often huge things, but little things like, oh, her blouse looks better in this color. Let's go back and just change the earlier ones, or changing the color of like the walls in an apartment or something. Yeah, that can change for sure.
So you guys both went to art school, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How much of the things you learn, how many of the things that you learned in art school do you feel like you're still sort of using?
Not many. When I went to school, it was before there was Apples and computers or any computers. I learned to draw, and paint sort of. But I think I'm one of those people who probably learned a lot more after I was in art school. I think art school taught me the stuff that I needed to learn, but I didn't quite learn it in school. I think I learned it after I got out and was like, waiting tables, but working as a freelancer on the side and trying to develop, my work. That's when I really had to hone the skills. Yeah.
I think for me, it taught you a different way of moving through life versus, I'm probably not going to throw a pot right now. But the way to approach problem solving, much more, I think it developed the creative mind, and you could either use it or not, or you could apply it. And there's still things I'll think about. Oh, I did that freshman. Maybe some project you didn't quite understand, but it's very elemental. But those were just building block. But I think it was really to kind of change your the way you approach life.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, in the bigger picture, it was very important. Like the technical skills were, when I was in school, technical like draftsmanship and painting was very out. That was like totally not cool. It was much more conceptual art was very important. And then on the other side was like graphic design, which was more of a process really. But what they did teach you, they taught you how to think, which actually was very important. But the application of it, at least for me, came after I was in school. It came, and for instance, comics were like so out. And I would bring in some comics that I was discovering when I was in school, because I didn't really read comics growing up, and I would find these underground comics that were coming out in New York on the punk rock scene, and I'd bring them in and show them to people, and they'd be like, "Those are just comics." And I was like, "Yeah, but they're really cool." Like, "Yeah, but they're just comics." And it was like, wow, yeah. Yeah. Things change though.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure you could find someplace where someone was saying that now.
Oh
But
yeah, I'm sure.
Hmm.
I was curious about even just thinking about like, color theory or, sort of sort of basic things that you learn also, whether that.
I think a lot of that stuff, like definitely in painting classes and things like that, there was a lot of discussion of color theory and what colors mean. And I just find all of that extremely subjective.
Mhm.
I just like the colors that I like. And I learned, it wasn't until I was long out of school that I learned, I just dropped all the color theory. It was like, I like these colors. And so I'm going to use them. And that was actually a really big step because I kind of had to unlearn a bunch of stuff that I've been taught. It's like, oh, if you use this color, then you have to put another contrasting color against it. And it's like, well, who made that rule?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. It's
That's
Uh,
something.
so,
a lot of
yeah,
art school was like how to make your work extremely archival. But at 19, to be honest, that
right.
stuff just really should end up in the garbage. There was a
Right.
lot of like effort put toward things that you really didn't need to know, but that's fine. That I think it was really to be in an atmosphere like that for 4 years with a bunch of other freaks.
Right.
That you,
Well, to
that
me,
was probably the best part.
sort of as you guys are talking about just your career that you've built, I mean, you've been doing this since the mid 90s. And I feel like for me as a fiction writer, I didn't study fiction writing in school. I didn't start really writing a lot of fiction until I was in my late 20s. I would write a little bit, but I just couldn't. It was almost like it seemed like a bar that was so
Yeah,
far away. Like, who
yeah.
does
Mhm.
this? I didn't know anybody who did it. And so I always think that that would have been the thing about going to an MFA in fiction would have been like, oh, there are other people doing this.
Yeah, I never wanted to get an MFA.
Yeah.
I thought law school, but I thought MFA, that's just flushing money down a toilet, to
Right.
be honest. Like, I didn't,
Well,
and that
or
was like
to
money I
study.
didn't have.
Yeah.
And I thought, well,
Yeah.
why not just do it? Or don't,
Exactly. Right.
I have a friend who's a musician, and he made a good analogy about it. Uh, you can send, 100 people to go see a band, and 99 of them are going to say, "I like that band," or "I didn't like that band," or "It was too loud," or "It wasn't catchy enough." But one person's going to go, "I could do that. I'm going to be in a band." I was never that guy when it came to comics. I read comics, I was really into them, but it just never occurred to me to do them until this guy called me up on the phone one day and asked if I would. He'd seen some of my work and he goes, "Your work reminds me of comics. Did you ever think of doing them?" And I was like, "I honestly never did." And he said, "Would you like to do one?" I'm like, "Okay." And that's how we got started. I mean,
That
literally.
See, I always think about that though, like as we sort of roll through life, like just that simple move of like, hey, I
Yeah.
really like your work. Have you thought about this? And all these doors open. So some of it is saying yes, and some of it
Yeah.
is, you know,
Right place, right time. But
right,
also just like, it's weird that it's like you said, it's like a bar. And it's not like a brick wall or anything, but you just feel like, well, I couldn't do that. You kind of self censor yourself, like, well, of course I couldn't do that, but actually you can.
right.
That's
Well,
that's
I
a
will
really
say the opening scene of Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters, the idea came to me like solid 3 years. And I wrote the opening scene, like just came home and wrote it in the way you just like do something.
yeah.
And then I put it away. I was like, this thing is too weird. And then I took it to some writer friends and they were like, oh no, that's really good. That needs to be something. But it's still that way of being like, oh, I don't know about this. So I think that this book is just such a great, when you hear, I mean, you hear like film noir and mythology and the shades, and I'm like, I'm all in. But I think sometimes when we're percolating these ideas, we're like, I don't know if anybody's gonna go for this.
The blessing
Yeah,
about
yeah,
comics, they might in comics,
Yes.
which is cool
Yes.
because they're already ready for a fun adventure.
Right. So we have some questions from the audience. So how is the artistic process for comics and graphic novels different from commercial illustration?
The difference is that with commercial illustration, you're working for a client, whether that's a magazine or a book publisher or an ad agency, and the person that you're working with is the art director. And by director, they're the one that's sort of guiding you through the process of doing the job. With some things, it'll be very, very heavily art directed. They're like, look, we want you to draw a toolbox for this ad with a hammer sticking out of it and a screwdriver, and the screwdriver needs a red handle, and it's cut and dry. And then there's more conceptual things for, like, say, magazines or newspapers, when they give you an article that's about say stress at work, and how do you deal with it. Well, it's open-ended, so you do a bunch of sketches for them, and they look at them and they say, well, this one's good, but we want to shift it a little bit and refocus it a little bit. So maybe you do another version of it, like, okay, that's good. And then you do the finish. But with comics, you're the client. You write it yourself. It has to be something that you like. And then you decide how long it's going to be, and you decide who the characters are going to be and where they are. And then you decide how many panels are going to be on each page, and how many pages there's going to be, and then you're going to draw it. So it's way more open-ended.
Here's the next question. Do you guys draw on paper or on the computer, or a mix of both?
I do all the preliminary sketches on tracing paper and I've been drawing this way for like 30 years. I use mechanical pencils with 0.5 millimeter leads, because I got like 5 of them lined up on my desk. So I don't have to sharpen pencils. I just keep going. They're always like, they always have a point to them. So when one is empty, I just get the next one, get the next one, get the next one. So I draw everything out with pencil sketches, and I use the tracing paper because I'll do very rough sketches and then put tracing paper over it, and then do a much tighter sketch from that. And then I scan that into the computer, and I do the line work in Adobe Illustrator, a vector software. And that's when it gets passed off to Maria for coloring. Yeah.
Okay, next question. You mentioned how in France there's a large readership for graphic novels. There's so much great work in the graphic novel space. And this is from Aaron, the librarian. He said, I always have to convince parents all the time that graphic novels are capital L literature. Why do you think the US is so far behind countries like France and Japan in giving respect to graphic novels?
It's interesting because kids do the scholastic, they books that they get every month, and I'm not quite sure. Well, I think adults in America don't read as much, so maybe they're not really reading very much of anything.
Right.
And comics was really in its own ghetto for so long. You had to go to a comic store. If you went to Barnes and Noble, there might be a little shelf like this. Maybe your library would have some, but it's really changed, it seems like, in the last 20 years. And I think, well, what I hear from friends who say, well, YA is so big now, but really it's going to be adult graphic novels in the next, because all of those teenagers are now becoming adults. And their whole life they've been reading these books, and they're really like generation one. Same from like growing up, there's no way I would have gone to a comic shop.
I didn't read them at all growing up.
It really wasn't for like girls to go in. Like you really would not have done that. And you went from picture books in the little kids library, which I loved, but then I graduated to Stephen King.
Right.
That was it. Like
without a lot. Yes. Without a lot in between. Well, I think there's like, I almost wonder sometimes if it's a little bit of our like puritanism. I think there's like this underlying sort of, and I hear the same weird snobbery about audiobooks. People will be like, that's not reading. I was like,
yeah, that's a weird distinction. Like, what do you say to someone who's blind? Like,
right.
You're not really reading, you're just listening. It's like, well,
or if you read a book to your child, like, which is, supposed to
Yeah.
be like one of the best things you could do as a parent. And then all of a sudden, just because you're listening in the car, you're like, but I wonder if there's some, like, I almost feel like there's this sort of sense in some settings that like books should be like castor oil or something. Like they're supposed to be like,
But I think librarians, especially in the past 15 or 20 years, have changed it all.
yeah.
I think it seems, I mean, I grew up always going to the library, but I think most kids my age did not. They just, it was dusty and it felt foreign and maybe a little lofty. And I think libraries seem so approachable now.
Yeah.
And
I
books are going to be
agree.
so sticky for kids. They just
Yeah.
can't resist them. I think it's all changing right now.
I think the teen librarians, I have to say, I'm calling Erin out on this too, but like my experience with teen librarians has just been across the board incredible. Like they do so much to engage readers and to provide a really safe space for kids who maybe are a little misfit,
Mhm.
in the like just I feel like every time I've been to a book festival, I've been so impressed with how at home kids seem to be in those spaces. So I
Yeah.
think that's really a
Yeah, libraries are one of the great institutions in this country. And as Maria said, when we were kids, our dad took us to the library like every 2 weeks. We weren't a family that bought books because we didn't have the money for it, but we sure had library cards and we were allowed to get whatever we wanted. So we would just load up on books and it's there's worlds in there in a library. And it's cool that like graphic novels are now a part of that in many libraries, which is great.
yeah.
And you don't have to go to the baseball card / comic book shop that might be on
Right.
the edge of town.
Yes.
That just like there was no way in hell my mom was going to let me in there. Plus, I probably didn't want to go in
Right.
anyway.
Well, you didn't know what to find, so
Right.
So what is the editing process like for you guys? There's another question. The editing process like for you guys when visuals and text are combined? Like if you realize like, oh, this story beat isn't playing quite how we thought it was going to. Now we need to change. You decide change the text, change the visuals, do both.
With the longer form stuff, the graphic novels, we write them first in prose as just sort of like a schematic of how the whole thing is going to fit together. And, with chapters and characters and plot and everything. And then when we put it together with the sketches, it completely changes. All the exposition goes away because that's in the pictures. And then the dialogue gets written and rewritten, I don't know, a half dozen times. And then lots of little tweaks too, because when you see characters talking from frame to frame and panel to panel and page to page, it looks different than when it's all just in paragraphs. It's all broken up into sentences and exclamations, and that shifts the emphasis on stuff. And then you look at it and go like, wait a minute, now he wouldn't say it like that. She would interrupt him. Okay, we have to rewrite that. So yeah, it changes a lot. Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of screenwriting lately, and I'm totally seeing the same thing. Like when even adapting my own work, adapting a novel to take it to, and your scenes that work great on the page in prose will just completely not work even in just as
Yeah.
people are speaking dialogue. So.
But it's fun to do the rewrite.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's not painful at all. It's really
Mhm.
great. It's like you watch it take form more
Mhm.
and come and pull together, which is really cool.
That's so cool. Well, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to wrap us up here. First of all, I'm going to say thank you so much
It was so
to
much
the
fun.
Oh,
Six
thank you,
Bridges Book
Emily.
Festival for having Peter and Maria on to talk about this book. You can buy it at Wordsworth Bookstore in the Heights, or at Pyramid Books if you are in Arkansas. But since this is virtual, you can do it, across the country and the world. If you buy it from Wordsworth, if you look at the chat, there's a link. A portion goes to continue to support the festival, which is great. And you're sort
That's
of
great.
supporting a sponsor of
Yeah,
the
that's good.
festival. And so thanks so much for coming. For anybody who wants to see you in person, could you tell us where you're going next?
This Sunday, I'll be at the Brooklyn Book Festival in Cadman Plaza. So that's,
Oh, fun.
and then Pete is going to be in San Francisco.
Yeah,
in 2
October
weeks.
13th. Yeah, it is for the Litquake Festival. They're having like a film noir symposium at a theater there where they're going to be screening a film afterwards. So I'll be there. And then in the early November, I'll be in Seattle for the Short Run Festival at the Fisher Pavilion right under the Space Needle. So if you're in the Seattle area, please come by. The show is free.
And it sounds like we should all go to France for the
Oh yeah,
Yes.
Angoulême. It is at the end of January, and in
Yes.
between we'll be in Los Angeles, Boston, and Philadelphia. So
Where are you going to be in Los Angeles, Boston, and Philly? What
So,
festivals or at?
Cala is Comic Arts LA. That's December 14th and 15th. Boston is called Mice. That's on the campus of Boston University, December 7th and 8th. And in October 12th is the Philly Comics Expo, which is an excellent show. And that's downtown on Pine Street.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. That's our
Thank you.
time.
Thank you,
Let's
This was
talk to
Emily.
you guys.
This was really fun.
Thank you, guys.